Hundreds of protesters have been arrested in Los Angeles for curfew violations, assaults, and obstruction as immigration demonstrations threaten to spread to other American cities.
LA Mayor Karen Bass says a 10-hour overnight curfew in an area in downtown LA will continue till things calm down, but she warns the unrest will persist if President Trump's tough immigration raids continue.
Her warning comes as the National Guard has been authorized to detain protesters before handing them to police to be arrested. California is at odds with Mr. Trump over the deployment of troops, which the president unilaterally ordered. For more, we are joined by William Banks. He's a professor emeritus of public administration and international affairs department at Syracuse University. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, we are hearing reports of some arrests being made and an uneasy calm returning to LA following that curfew. But given the intensified federal presence there, just how sustainable do you think this relative calm is, and what could reignite unrest?
Well, that's a very good question. No one knows for sure, but it does appear as though things are somewhat more calm than they were a couple of days ago. What inflamed the tensions there, of course, on the streets in Los Angeles was President Trump's deployment of National Guard. The protests were mild and not at all violent in the early days when the police and sheriffs in Los Angeles were simply monitoring the situation. But once National Guard were on the scene, deployed by the president, then the tensions began to mount and there began to be a little more disruption and violence associated with the protests. The president, of course, authorized this deployment as president against the wishes of Governor Newsom from California. In our system in the United States, it's the most common way for National Guard forces to be deployed is at the behest of a governor, not the president. The forces in their default status report to and are deployed by the governor, not the president. The president relied on an obscure legal provision that allowed him to make such a deployment and to federalize the National Guard as a protective service. Protect federal property, the buildings, the federal buildings where immigration services are housed, and to protect the federal personnel who were undertaking those raids. It's a very narrow and limited role, at least as things stand right now.
So, Professor Banks, if the curfew did succeed in achieving that relative calm, the arrest of the agitators, so to speak, should officials, meaning the mayor and Gavin Newsom, have tried to do it earlier, in part to stem that excuse that President Trump is using, to send in even more troops as the violence spike? And I also am wondering why just 1 square mile and not 500 square miles, which is the size of LA?
That's a very good question. It's a very limited area. As the governor's pointed out, 99.9% of LA is peaceful. 99.9% of the citizens of Los Angeles are in their homes and going about their business. So it's a very limited operation. Some people suspect that the president is planning to do this over and over again to simply draw attention to his larger objective, which is this mass deportation program that he's promised since the first day of his second term, and that he would use the military to help achieve that objective. It's not clear that that's happening, but many of us think he might be doing so. And if he does, it runs the risk of inflaming passions and tensions around the country in other cities as well.
Professor, I just want to pick up on that particular point. 700 Marines, undergoing a crash course in crowd control. They reportedly won't carry live ammunition. You mentioned the risk there. I mean, I'm trying to get an understanding here. How risky will it be to send in a force that's not well versed in de-escalation techniques? I mean, which obviously go beyond firing tear gas and firing rubber bullets.
You actually put your finger on perhaps the most important point here. These forces that are being deployed, they're California National Guard personnel and now a limited number of U.S. Marines, they're not trained for this kind of operation. They're trained to fight and win wars, of course, and in extraordinary circumstances to respond to a humanitarian disaster, fight fires in Southern California, or respond to a storm or a flood, not to deal with citizens and respect their civil liberties. So even though they don't have live ammunition, they're not trained to treat citizens as the police treat citizens on a daily basis. And there's a real risk, I think, that if this kind of operation continues or if it's repeated in other cities around the United States, that bad things could happen.
And Professor, politically speaking, a very public clash between Mr. Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is seen as a 2020 hopeful. As some pundits say, it may carry political risks or potential opportunities for the governor. How do you think he's navigating this moment? Could this confrontation with Washington help or hurt him?
Well, it's going to help him in California, that's for sure. And what's happening now, of course, is that the other like-minded governors are showing their support for Governor Newsom. He sued President Trump to enjoin this particular deployment. It's likely that a federal judge will not get involved in the case or not get involved in the short term in a way that would make a difference. But now you've got a series of states, what we would think of in the U.S. as blue states, that are going to take a posture that's very similar to that of California, perhaps driving a further wedge between President Trump's enforcement plans and the way that will go down in states where he's not the most popular politician in town.
But Professor Banks, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has mobilized the National Guard as well. There have been protests in Omaha, Nebraska, both red states. So I'm wondering, when does this become a problem for the president? I mean, he's argued consistently this is the fault of Joe Biden and Democrat states that are, causing this immigration crisis.
Yeah, he's banking on the popularity of his plans to deport those who are not here lawfully. And indeed, the polls showed, and in the election, I think it demonstrated that the MAGA crowd, the majority of Americans that voted, a bare majority, were in support of his determination to deport those who are here unlawfully. I think if the raids continue, if the military continues to be involved and draws attention to the ICE enforcement mechanisms, the popularity of his initial objective may decline over time, because I think the American people, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, don't like to see military on the streets. And if there are military on the streets in multiple cities around the United States, whether or not they're behaving martially, it's a feeling, if you will, of people out in the communities we don't like that. We have always expected our laws to be enforced by civilians, by police, sheriffs, marshals, not members of the military carrying weapons and wearing armor.
Understood. Professor Banks, we will have to leave it there for now. We thank you so much for your time. William Banks is Professor Emeritus at the Public Administration and International Affairs Department at Syracuse University.